Hello, everyone. We are three Black Pratt grads. I'm Mark Skinner. I'm here with my friends Greg Cleghorn and Kenneth Nelson, and we have conversations about photography. And this is episode number 102. And this is what do we learn from copying other photographers? One of the things that we did while we were at Pratt was we viewed other photographers' work. We didn't have the internet when we went, but we would go to the library, samples would be brought into class by the instructors, and we would study the methodology of the mostly street photographers and some documentary photographers that we would have access to. And part of what you did was you would kind of try to emulate what those photographers did and incorporate what you've learned into your own photographic style. Uh, the first person who's going to present and speak about the photograph that they are presenting is going to be Kenneth.
Yeah. They called it
Yes.
pastiche, though. It was pastiche, right? In the style of another artist. Sorry, Kate.
Yeah, that's okay. I don't remember it being called that, but that's okay. We just called it crit.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. So, as as someone who has sought to emulate photographers such as uh, Ansel Adams and Victor Skripneski and a host of other fashion photographers in my early years, because that's sort of where I wanted to go. But things change and they change. So, and Pratt was a point of departure in that regard. So what you're looking at now is on the screen is just an amalgam of all the photographers I've ever tried to emulate. So you're not going to see one particular photographer within the photograph. I would suggest that you see them all in some way, shape, or form. Now that's being, I guess, uh, you know, just off the
Ambitious.
cuff, huh?
Ambitious.
Yeah.
But,
Well,
but
well,
I think it's an honest answer. I think
I
when you
agree.
photograph like this, if you're well versed in a lot of photographers' work, and particularly if you know the people that uh, Kenneth tends to kind of show the two of us, you see elements of all of that because those photographers spark things for him creatively.
yeah, yeah, and of course, I'm very much attracted to contrast and tonal values and differentiations in those, and anything that incorporates that just gets my gases going. And so, in this particular instance, this is in Manhattan during the 116th Street Festival in East Harlem or Spanish Harlem, and I just saw this person, and it's a very crowded event, so it's packed to the gills. And uh, for the most part, I want you to read what the photograph is, but I want to give you a little bit of the background. These are classical bicycle riders from the Bronx. I think they're from the Bronx, so they're a bicycle club, and they ride these classical bikes around. So choppers and three speeds and stuff like that. And so they're just standing in front of them. So they're presenting their bikes to the people at this festival. And this is just one of the participants who I'm figuring brought one of his bikes to show. But I was, of course, as a street photographer, I'm walking around. I'm looking for visual things that are going to excite me, and this was one of the things that just excited me. As you're looking around, you're inspecting things, and you're seeing what makes sense and where balance is, and who's standing out, and who's just looks a little bit either out of place or just a little bit different, or is just engaged in something that is just slight left or slight right of standard, and sort of explore that. And he was this person was definitely engaged in either daydreaming or inspecting something, and it just caught my fancy. So
Well, it's interesting. You know whose sort of influence I see in this image, despite the fact that it's an overcast day and you've got more of a scene than this photographer. I see a little bit of Bruce Gilden's uh, work sort of
okay.
being imported into this particular image. The contrast levels are they're a little amped, and the fact that the main subject is a little bit more unawares. I mean, I think that sensibility to approaching your subject on the street is similar. I mean, a lot of other people do that. I mean,
Hmm.
certainly like Joel Meyerowitz photographs people, and they tend to be very much unaware. But I think uh, this is closer to me to sort of Bruce Gilden's sort of than Joel Meyerowitz.
Yeah. If I were to, classify that, I would definitely say that although I came to know of Bruce Gilden, I came to know of Bruce Gilden much later in my life than somebody else. So his influences were not core to my upbringing photographically. But I'll definitely say that fashion photographers of the 70s and 80s were definitely very important to me, and not much street photographers because it wasn't much of a thing clicking at that time. So it was either fashion or landscape, you know.
Right, right.
And for me, I guess you got that. It's funny because even though Avedon was around in those times, I didn't know who Avedon was.
Mhm.
So I didn't come around to know Avedon until Pratt, so in the late '80s. So that was just an interesting point of perspective. So and again, I think this image is from 2007. So I would definitely say that, if this is the case, then it is an amalgam of all those people, including Avedon, including Scribnesky, including anyone else that I've ever photographed that had some type of influence where I wanted to be like them in photographically, and even be like them with any accolades that they have received in their lifetime. So, I
Mm.
mean, who wouldn't want those, you know?
I love this image, Ken. It's just so full, and it's like one of those paintings where you have to like really look close to see each person in such detail that that the whole image is enriched by it. And as far as it's interesting. I mean, we studied postmodernism and modernism and all of that. And I remember vividly, I had asked, why are there no black street photographers and no black postmodern photographers? And he said, ask me that in class. And I did. And he said, well, because it's a white upper middle class art movement, period. And I mean, it would have been nice to have have forums like they have now, where a lot more black photographers, black and brown photographers, and people of all ethnicities, can get together and show their work, so that I mean, this is a fabulous image. I mean, it's just so full of energy, and culturally, it's spot on for New York and the different ethnicities there. And I mean, it would be great if they had this at, Kenny Nelson at Pratt Institute. Yeah, he was a street photographer and he did this and that, and show some of the examples of this. They shouldn't just have to go to, an ethnic museum to see your work.
Yeah,
Museum.
because definitely, and one of the things that should strike anyone who looks at this image is just the level of patriotism. You know, it's just full of it. Everywhere you go, everywhere you see, almost every inch is covered by either a Puerto Rican flag or an American flag.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
it's just full of patriotism.
hmm,
You know,
absolutely.
and that tends to go at the core values for people from the island of Puerto Rico, because there's a certain level of pride with the revolution that they went through to get to where they are today. So,
Right, right. It's a great shot, Ken. I love that image.
yeah,
Yep, I agree.
that's it. That's me. That's my influence.
Okay.
Mark, I
Yep.
think
Up.
A little
you
too
got
close.
next.
Righty. This particular image is an image that I photographed last week specifically for this talk. And I made a point to go out and try to emulate another photographer. Um, I tend to, if you've heard some of these other talks, I'm a big fan of the painters, the precisionists. So you'll probably see some influences of that in this image. But what I also tried to do was try to emulate the type of work that Ralph Gibson does. Now we talk a lot about deceased photographers, but I kind of wanted to, and besides Joel Meyerowitz, we would like to talk to the idea that there are other photographers that are living and doing work. And Ralph Gibson is very, very popular in the art scene right now. And so his work is very similar to the type of work that we studied when we were at school. And because he's sort of a living continuum of that aesthetic, I kind of wanted to say you could, copy this. Now, the real question is, what makes this different? Well, a Ralph Gibson photo would be vertical. He says this himself because he has ideas about why a photograph is a vertical and that sort of a movie still is a horizontal. But the elements are kind of there. There's a lot of mystery. There's juxtaposition of shapes, and in the real world, there's a little bit of I guess what we would say today is a little bit of horror. If you
Bit of
look
what?
at some of his older horror, HORROR, like a little bit of it's a little scary. This particular image I called Joyride, and just we haven't talked about titles. If you title something, you're sort of imposing a thought onto the image. So I called this one Joyride, and if you call it Joyride and you see this cliff, particularly, I mean, when I photographed this was before Ian, and now we are post Ian. The fact that there's water just at the edge of this landmass it's terrifying. And then there's also the spikes. The car is headed toward the spike. I think it would be better if I could have gotten some blur motion. Maybe if I had a flash and just popped the flash just before the car went underneath that wall. But the car is actually moving. It's really hard to tell because there's a fast shutter speed, but there's also debris on the sidewalk that's next to the highway. So there's a lot of things that can throw one off and be a little scary if you take the time to peruse the image. You got the spikes, you've got the cliff, you've got a gate with debris on a sidewalk. Well, these are all things very scary.
So where does the joy ride? Where does the joy come from?
Well, see, that's the thing. If I call it joyride, I'm imposing an idea.
Oh
Right?
yeah. Okay.
See, and that's what I'm talking about. We haven't talked about titles. Maybe for another session, we'll call this. We'll maybe talk about titles. But for me, the idea was, well, in a joyride, there's the element of danger, and so there was a car, and then all these sort of elements that resemble dangerous things. I put that there. But I really want to speak to the idea of copying. It's not just, I'm not saying copy something verbatim. I'm saying you try to copy someone's style, because there's a photographer named Joe Buisink, Buisink, and he's a wedding and photojournalistic wedding photographer. And when I was doing weddings, I watched some of the seminars. And one of the things he says is, if you're doing another wedding, you can copy what you saw at another wedding because everything's different. The bride and groom are different. The elements that are in the wedding, the location is probably different. But I'm a big believer, even before that, like when we were in Pratt, that if you try to sort of emulate photographs, unless you go to the exact same spot, you're going to be able to create something new by just trying to remember the things that were really outstanding to you and try to, be thoughtful and try to, intentionally add certain things that resonate for you. And then after a while, you get in the habit of reading the scene and seeing things without having to copy. So that was really it. It was like I said, this was just an exercise, and that's all I'm trying to illustrate, was that by copying, you can get a great photograph, or a really good photograph, even if it's not necessarily your style, your genre, or anything of that nature.
Okay. Okay.
My question actually to that would be, would it necessarily be someone, if you're going to emulate someone, it's going to be someone who necessarily is good or not necessarily at the pinnacle of success photographically?
Well, ideally, the people who are the most successful tend to have the most successful photographs that are easily accessible to you, right? other than commercial photographers, advertising photographers, who quite honestly, a lot of that work is anonymous unless they later tell you they've done it. The
Mhm.
editorial photographers and the art photographers, their names tend to be very much tied to the images. So it's a lot easier to get access to, say, the work of you know, Eugene Smith.
Mhm.
And you can see a good amount of Eugene Smith's work, and you can also see some of the failures in the Library of Congress, I believe, and then you can see some, really great ones. And that goes with a lot of other people. But I would say try to look at the most successful people first, but then after a while, even if you see images on Instagram or Facebook or Flickr even, if there are things that really resonate for you, it doesn't necessarily have to be the best photograph you've ever seen. It might be a subject matter that you tend not to work in, and you might just say, well, I like that image, and like many writers say, oh, I think I can do that better, and so you think about how you're going to approach that subject, and maybe you can make a better photograph. You can challenge yourself in that way.
Yeah.
I think it's a
Okay.
wonderful exercise to continue your growth as a photographer.
Yeah. I see. Yeah, because I was stuck in a when I was trying to comprehend the exercise, I was stuck in a certain perspective, which was copy exactly. And if you're a perfectionist, trying to copy exactly is just an impossibility. So it led me into a loop that had no end. So I had no finality to it. So that's why I just couldn't comprehend.
Right, because you're just
It's a
trying to replicate. I'm sorry.
double-edged assignment, shoot in the style of another photographer. But it kind of, for an exercise, yeah. But it does stifle you. But hopefully, when you come out of that, then you can start shooting, with, like you said, you start adding all of those other elements to your style, so that what all the things that you've learned become this amalgam of what's in you. So when you capture something, it's your image.
Right, because you're not going to. I mean, you may be able to copy one or two like someone else, but you're not going to be able to, and you won't want to replicate someone consistently. Uh, it's fruitless. But to as an exercise, to just a few images that you see on, keep them up on your desktop or on your phone, keep them up on the web pages up, and you look and you go, hey, this is something really good. Let me see what I can do. It's a great way to sketch. And digital, it's not like you had to spend film money, and you didn't have to buy film, and you didn't have to process it. It's a very uh, low cost, once you have the tools, it's a low cost exercise, and it's something people can do with a telephone even. So
Okay.
are we up for Greg's image next?
Yeah, let's wrap it up. I, you know, I tried to bite my lip because I felt you kind of going off on a tangent, but I was trying to relate what you were saying to the image that you shot, and you were reading something into it, and I was trying to go with it instead of kind of questioning it. And I really like the image, but it is a horror ride, like you said. It's more of a, but anyway, moving right along. Pastiche, shooting in the style of another photographer. Now we learned about some old white guys, and that's okay. They were really good at their craft, and I learned a lot from it. In addition to Gordon Parks and Tony Barboza and several other photographers of color. And what I learned was I tried to do some studio work in the style of Tony Barboza, and I learned a lot. Diffusion lightings, getting the strobes in the right place, getting the, seeing how like 2 feet can change how light, hit and wrapped around a subject, how diffusers worked. how gels work, things that you could do with the equipment if you have it at your access, you know, getting a model's look just so, making elements in the image, like having the importance of having a mua on set, you doing the makeup or the person doing the makeup is like another world from having a professional makeup artist on set who can, just really go to town. Or if you're lucky enough to have one of those makeup artists that can make, a face look like reptile skin or feathers, or, stuff like that. But it was a good exercise. And for me, being drawn towards street photography because this is unfortunately like that, excuse me, that Jewish curse that I learned in New York is like, may you live in interesting times. And we most certainly do. And this was a one of those Black Lives Matters rallies, marches, and I felt it necessary to get out there and do it and photograph things that spoke to me, but in a way that told the story, because I do like photojournalism, and I Robert Capa, getting out into the war zone. I tried so hard in my Navy days. I tried to get into combat camera, but I just couldn't seem to get there. But being out in it is attractive to me. And on the other side, the pastiche with the purely, I won't say purely, but the artistic side of it. I said it then, and I'll say it again. Cartier-Bresson, that decisive moment, his famous shot with the man is hopping over a puddle, or it looks like a puddle, it could have been cracked in the earth for all I could tell. And, it's got the perfect setting and everything. And, I'd go out on rainy days and try to capture something similar. And it was hard. He makes it seem so effortless, but what do they say? Luck is when opportunity meets the right circumstance, and that making something that's difficult look easy, with a camera, usually there's a lot more work to it than it looks, because once you've snapped it and you've got all the elements working, then it becomes like it transforms into something else, like Ken was saying, yes, you can do these exercises that they put us through, but bottom line, like you were saying, what you don't want in life, for me, and I can't speak for anybody else, but I mean, it's a compliment, but it's also kind of an insult if somebody looks at your work and say, oh my gosh, your whole body of work is like, pick Gibson or Bresson, or not that that's an insult, but like Ken was saying, where are you in the image? What are you bringing to the image? And after you learn the lesson, it's on you to shoot and develop your own vision. And I think that's important, And
I think some people have.
we should look into just like having a forum for young photographers of color, or just open it up to everybody. I would like to really have a forum.
But I think a lot of people have similar visions, and I know there are two photographers for me whose work kind of seems to overlap. There are very specific stylistic differences.
Then there's a difference. I'm not wait.
But I'm thinking specifically. I'm thinking specifically where really there are two photographers who are really, really good. One is Marc Mann, the other one is Platon. And
only two photographers,
and I think those two photographers, the portrait work that they do, they have little idiosyncrasies that make each of their styles very much their own. But on your initial viewing of the subject matter and sort of their stance toward their subject, you can see where the two of them overlap.
Well,
And
without
and
without examples, it's hard for me to follow you.
right, well, yeah, well, you can look them both up. But my point is that I think we are in such a visually rich society at this point, with so many image makers and so much imagery for us all to consume, that I think when it comes to sort of working that quadrilateral, it's a very there
Quadrilateral.
are there are a lot of overlaps and similarities that we will see. And I think, I mean, those are just the two that was just the one example that came to mind initially when you said that. But there are a lot of examples like that where there are people who are very similar to one another in certain, and you kind of have to decide, well, editorially, you'd have to decide which one better fits the content of your story. Like, the reason why I say that is because in this particular question, the particular image, I wanted to know whose influences specifically are you referencing in this photograph? And you mentioned that this was during one of the Black Lives Matters rallies. So how do you see this sort of fitting in the context of our culture? Is it a standalone piece, or is it an image that is part of, say, an article? Where would you place this?
I got one word for you. Guernica.
Okay, you'd have to explain a little bit about that.
Okay. It's with all our classical training, Picasso, when the bombs were falling in his home, native land, and it was horrible, and then to see what's going on here with racial violence, racial unrest, and now with all that madness going on in Ukraine and such. I saw this sign and I slapped a faux fisheye on there so that it would warp. And I've got, you guys are familiar with Picasso's Guernica. Anyway,
Is that with the
like Marc says,
the
look at
bull's horns and
and,
the?
I just saw the enough is enough, and I wanted to film the frame, and I wanted to juxtapose the blood red on the blue sky, and the police on the side, and protester on one side, and just enough. It's part of a larger story. But the last time, oh my gosh, yeah, when I was driving cross country and I came across the Mandalay Bay tragedy, where that guy shot up and killed 57 people and injured hundreds. And the outcry was like enough, and they just came out with a documentary called 11 Minutes. I highly recommend seeing that, because you really don't get a feeling of, unless you're right there, and seeing people drop, and seeing, like George Floyd was like executed on TV, 9 minutes, and the world saw it. So just capturing images like that in the moment, and like Ken was saying, yes, I've got all these photographers in my toolkit. Now I shoot and tell my story, for the story that I.
All
So
right. All right. So Guernica, Picasso is a painter. Any photographers you feel have sort of influenced this particular set of choices?
Kind of like Kenny, several, just certain in-your-face photographers, certain street photographers, and but it's the whole experience. Pratt wasn't just photographers. I learned a lot in drawing. I've told you guys that story where I learned light and shadow. I learned about filling a frame. I learned about composition and placement to make the importance of a subject matter in the image. So photographers, that influenced this? I'm sure there are a couple, but none that stand out. This was kind of something that grabbed my eye, and just shooting it from a passive, 15 feet away to get the whole image wasn't enough for me. I wanted that, So,
Well, just for to let you know, I did look up Guernica because I wasn't sure exactly which painting that was. It was the one I was thinking of with all of the faces, the black and white painting of the Spanish War.
okay.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'll just put in this last thought, which is most of the time when I'm out photographing, I'm really not thinking in terms of a photographer that I admired, even in the most shortest of times. I'm usually in the moment, and I'm thinking about that moment. I'm thinking about what I'm seeing. I'm really have no thought process in terms of who would have shot like what.
Hmm.
Now, maybe before I go in to take the photograph, I might do that for a split second, but I don't ever recall myself thinking in terms of who do I want to
It looked
have
like.
this photograph look like while I'm taking the photograph.
I see
Maybe before,
you
maybe after.
you work too on the street, Ken, and you and I are kind of similar in that. You look
Yeah,
for elements to come together in front of the lens, or
and
you.
and I think that's the way everyone should work. But in terms of an exercise that sort of stretches us out of
Yeah.
our comfort zone, I think it's really an interesting exercise to undertake. I think it's really something that you can kind of it really tests how much you really pay attention to the work of others and at what point uh, that work is meaningful to you enough for you to emulate.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's an interesting exercise.
Yeah, yeah. I will say, well, I'll just put this out there. I think the only person or the only photographer in recent memory that I would seek to emulate at any point in time, given that I just began to hear about that person in the last 11 years, is Vivian Meyer.
There you go. And I think you should do that. You should kind of walk around and see if you can kind of emulate some of what she did.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Well, she did a lot of self-portraits, so that would be quite easy.
Right, right. But I mean, like things where I think she photographed, baby carriages and so forth. That's
Yes.
a little tough
Yeah.
now because everyone's very, touchy about
Yeah.
photographing children and so forth.
Yeah.
But there might be similar dynamics of people on the street that you can kind of go, okay,
Yeah.
she's looking at people in a certain state. She's looking at people who are behaving a certain way. They're in certain environments, and you can kind of try to, replicate the circumstances under which you create your captures.
Yeah, and just for those people out there who don't know who she is, she's a photographer who came to prominence in about 2009, 2010. She took photographs in the 1950s and 1960s, and she kept them for herself. And they were brought out of the depths of storage by someone and gained prominence over the last decade.
Sweet.
Yeah. All right.
So, do we have any more to say about any of these three photographs?
Keep shooting. Find your vision. Find your niche. I mean, if it's astral photography, if it's blur photography, photography just keeps on giving. As far as you can push it, usually without limitation, it can go there. Especially with the advent of digital enhancement or just making a well done image look better. You know, there is a positive side to the topic where you see an image and just try to emulate it. Try to see what the photographer who shot it went through to get it, and then push it further. Or say, okay, I got it, and let me do my thing. But keep shooting. This photography is just a wonderful, wonderful medium. Even though we're studying guys that are like dead and gone, but But you know, they had a handle on it.
I have nothing to add.
All right. Well, we have been three Black Pratt grads, and I am Marc Skinner. I'm here with Kenneth Nelson and Greg Cleghorn. Thank you for watching this episode. Good night.